we have time for a few comments and questions before we close off. So now people have some ideas about where we're going. Yes.
What do we call it?
Let's take a few questions, and that'll give me a chance to think on that.
Yes. Margo?
Corporations, even the government is attacking labor movement through bad sociology. Okay. Top corporations and even the government is attacking labor movements through bad sociology. So will this affect the organizing the unorganized drive? What is the best way to handle this situation?
Did you say bad sociology?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Okay, take another couple.
I just want to make a comment or say what's your opinion on this, because I was listening to you and you kind of used the left and labor interchangeably, like when you were doing your presentation there. So is it necessarily the fact that the left and labor, do they really want the same thing though? Like you mentioned politicizing and labor, but if you look at it, there are in countries in Europe where labor parties have actually governed, they couldn't deliver to the labor, they couldn't deliver. And if you take a case in point in Canada here, where NDP was, government was in Ontario, they still didn't deliver. So having that as a background, would you now say that the left and labor, do they want the same thing? Are they necessarily the same, or are they interchangeable?
Maybe one more and then, yeah.
Yeah, a couple times today in the speech now and then earlier this morning, you mentioned that labor, as far as the allies for the dispossessed, whether this morning's talk was more about the students and youth getting involved in activism. You had said that we're the most powerful force.
Labor?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Within that, and I've been contemplating that all day. I don't know that we're the most powerful, but if you break it down to simple physics, yeah, power is equal to work over time. So yeah, you're right. But I think from an energy point of view, potential energy point of view, I think that we really need to grab on to what the youth movement is doing, and because the thing is our power is fairly fleeting. I was thinking this morning that maybe the term would be better if we admitted that we're better resourced than the youth. As far as as power, I'm not sure if we're actually necessarily as powerful as they potentially are. So that was more of a comment than a question.
We'll take one more and then, yeah.
I think that's all the time we're going to have.
So I take great hope in what you've said. It seems to me, though, that if labor is to reinvent itself, it has to have the courage to examine its own weaknesses and the structures that it's adopted that are, in fact, preventing it from taking the kind of role that you suggested. And I was just wondering if you could comment on that.
Okay. Okay, let's go through these. What to call it? I don't know. And I think what it is, what we call it, and in fact, the variety of forms that this might take are sort of things for the future. I'm less worried about the name than about the process, right? And actually beginning the process with even small baby steps which need to be taken. That dodges your question, but I think that it's as if this was to happen, my sense is it would find its name. It could be.
You didn't ask it for a particular reason.
Have you got a name?
No. But I asked it because when you look at the concept of union, public opinion about union, what you're saying is we may have the power. In reality, we don't have the power. In reality, our membership has the power. And if our membership says don't, then we don't. And that's
Yeah.
the struggle we have.
But I've always thought that that's a dialectical process. That is that leaders and led, move in tandem. You are not going to get rank and file workers engaging in acts they consider to be adventurous and defeatist because, a few people get up and say, march to the barricades. It can't happen that way. But on the other hand, if you have a trade union leadership that has actually compromised, led people to defeat, they learn that lesson too, right? So I think that, that's often put forward by people very different than you of reasons why, the labor movement never does anything very radical. And I've never really bought that position. But one name for it is simply what the left has always called it, the workers' movement, which is different than trade unions, but encompasses the left, the dispossessed, etc. But, again, now on the sociology, yes, I think we need thinkers, we need intellectuals, we need people who are putting forward, ideas about, about contemporary struggles, about the trade unions, about the left, that challenge the ideological hegemony of this bad sociology, which feeds very much into the corporate agenda and which is used in all kinds of commonsensical ways to form a kind of cultural and intellectual barrier to the notion that struggles that can be victorious are even on the realm of possibility, that they're even on our radar screens. So yes, I think that's very important to put forward, alternatives and contrasting paradigms.
And that prevents the youth.
Absolutely, absolutely. That and a lot of other things that.
It will affect also the history of labor movement.
The history is a very big part of it. Yes.
Bad sociology is bad sociology.
Yeah. Yes. No. And that's why groups like the Alberta Labour History Institute and radical historians actually do have a small but fundamental role to play in creating a sense that that another world is possible, that alternatives are really there. And the past was different, but you can actually learn from and be inspired from a past where the evidence is overwhelming that masses of workers were willing to stand up and fight to win. And the conditions that we think are terrible now, and they are terrible, were actually much, much worse in the past. I mean, now there were some other things that were in some senses better too. There were more collectivities of workers because there was less in the way of sort of the monolith of consumer culture and a whole series of other things that fragment people's existence, right? Whereas before, collectivities and solidarities were built into neighborhoods, et cetera. But we can try to reproduce that in these movements that we create. Okay, the left and the labor. Maybe I didn't make it very clear. I mean, I do think that the left, the revolutionary left in particular, and the trade unions are in fact different. And the left that I'm talking about would be outside the NDP tradition. But a very, and you're absolutely right, I think, that the notion that the trade unions have necessarily embraced the left and that it's necessarily been a co-joined project, there's lots of evidence against that. I asked Paul Moyse the question, which he dodged. Well, can you look at, can you actually talk a bit about how, the trade union leadership has played its role in undermining the left in Canada over the course of the last, half a century. And the evidence for that is legion. I mean, they've driven the left out of the trade unions. Not all trade union leaders, but certainly there is a layer of ensconced conservative, trade union leaders who used the Cold War in the 50s and early 60s, late 40s, 50s, early 60s to drive workers out. It was still happening in the 70s. I dare say it probably happened yesterday somewhere. But there has to be, but the way you combat that is to create a rank and file caucuses that won't let that happen, that actually refuse that project of a layer of ensconced labor leadership. On the labor's power, I think we're talking at cross purposes and perhaps not in any fundamental disagreement. What I mean when I talk about labor's power is not the question of energy that you talked about when you were comparing the students. But the students, the students in Quebec are heroes. I mean, they've been in the streets for months. They are going to, many of them, if not all of them, lose their years. I mean, and it is the tenor of these students and the students that I know in Ontario is so fundamentally different that and there's a whole series of reasons why that's happened, which relate to Quebec's, particular history, which I don't have time to go into. But I think really, yes, those students have energy, but when they're striking against themselves. I mean, the power, they're striking for, I'm being a bit facetious, but the cost they're paying for refusing their involvement in a system which they're opposing is going to be extracted from their hides. They know that, and they're willing to pay that price. And that's what's phenomenal about what's going on there. Now, what I'm saying about the labor movement is, the labor movement has power because, quite frankly, it has that capacity. Do you want to sing that song, David? Sing that song again. The song.
In our hands, we hold a power greater than their hoarded gold.
Yeah, and that's the point, is that the labor movement has that power. Now, again, it's been locked into using that power less and less, and in more and more legally circumscribed. Sorry. Oh, a Palmer gender slip. That's all that anyone's going to quote out of this talk. I know. Circumscribed. Anyway, it's limited, but it's been self-limited because of, in some senses, what the labor movement bought into with that post-war settlement, which has been unraveled. But the use of the strike and the use of the withdrawal of labor power, it's under attack, of course. I mean, essentially, you won't be able to strike in Canada in any work sector if things keep going as they're going. And yet, if you look back at labor history before this post-war settlement, and it wasn't all bad, the post-war settlement, but if you look back before, they had there were strikes happening in a far more spontaneous manner. So really what I'm saying is that the labor movement's power, when fused with youth and other oppressed sectors' energy and commitment, will revitalize the labor movement and will give, potentially, these oppressed groups levers that they need. What would happen if the trade union movements of Canada said, we are actually on the same wavelength of these students? And in fact, in their public statements and programs, I think almost every union would endorse this notion, right? Of the students aren't really about another $700 in tuition. They're about a whole nature of the nature of civil society and how we're governed. And I don't know of a trade union, however conservative, that actually has the position that the student position is wrong. But what would happen if they said, okay, we are now backing these students, 100%. And we are going to, for instance, we are going to educate and agitate and organize our members, because you need to do that to be able to draw about, what's going on in Quebec in the streets and why it's fundamentally important for people to see positive things about that. We're going to have them in to talk to us. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're also going to give money, which we have in our treasuries, so that, when these people are hauled into jail, they'll be defended. An injury to one is an injury to all. And if there isn't some kind of change, we are going to, maybe we'll play it first within the boundaries of the law. We're going to coordinate, certain strike activities with, pressure on certain sectors to, accommodate this. Or, we will say up to and including a general strike. Now, this is to break the box in some senses, and it's to put the labor movement, in the jaws of a state that will bite down with a lot of repression. So, I mean, I don't say all of this unmindful, but I only say that, that is a way to get back to this gentleman's, question earlier about how, if you did that, then trade unions would look like something different than the conventional wisdoms that they've become for many of these young people. They would not appear to be, simply bureaucratized, big labor's alternative to big business. We have to get back to, infusing the labor movement with an understanding that it's not the equivalent, its power isn't the equivalent of some bureaucratized state agency or some big business. So it's the power and the energy that should be feeding off of one another. Lastly, Jim's question. Okay, what was it again, Jim? It was to examine the weaknesses of the trade unions that have.
And have the courage to reinvent ourselves and get rid of institutional barriers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's an uphill fight, and as I said in the talk, I think it will come from below. I mean, it's a protracted process, and I don't think it's going to happen. Again, this gets back to the gentleman's question in the back. It's not going to happen without a left outside the unions that's also embedded within it, that's actually provides a space for people who actually are committed to trade unionism but want to expand its boundaries and its political agendas. And then, you go from there to, is somebody in a position to, run for elected office, et cetera, and, take things in a different direction. But all of that will be pushing constantly to say, this structure holds us back. This notion of collective bargaining may well hold us back. We have to do these things, but we can also say, okay, we're not going to be bound, our hands tied necessarily by them. So, and this isn't something that's going to happen overnight. This is a protracted process. I mean, it's taken generations to get us in the downward spiral we're in. It will take generations to get us to a new level.